Do you think that there's like an Earth grid, and the UFOs or energies or entities are attracted to these grids on the Earth? There's like frequencies coming out at certain nodal points. Do you think that's the key to this?
Well, yeah, because wherever you have the proper resonant frequencies, it gives them a vortex point to come in and interact with us. And those sacred geometry structures that you're seeing in the crop circles in England. In fact, there's one of them that's identical, you'll see in my video, the vortex, to the vortex waveform coming out of the middle of the NASA UFO, which is a ball of light. So we see a connection, and we see a connection in many people's work that some of these orbs of light are the actual beings themselves, and the craft are something different. And that not all of them need the craft. A lot of them seem to be able to come in and out of the resonant frequencies that resonant cavity geometries help create.
Sure.
And that interests me because when we're looking at this NASA footage that NASA's camera is clearly seeing into the near and the far ultraviolet, as well as some very particular infrared frequencies, we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing these balls of light that behave intelligently. And there's one scene in when the space shuttle's over Africa where we see these very faint, whispery faint balls of light flying into formation in a circle and stopping and holding their circular form. And then one flies into the middle, and the second it gets to the middle, it gives off this extra luminosity. And you go, are these the same ones as the crop circle makers? See, for me, this stuff gets deeper and deeper and deeper. My mind just goes deeper and deeper, and I go, I found this online. I did not discover this particular point I'm about to tell you, but if you take pi 3.14, times 0.5151, you get phi, the golden ratio, 1.618.
Really?
Well,
wow.
So what that does is it shows you that the 5151 harmonic and pi and phi are all part of a trinity of sacred geometry numbers, and the 5151 has been missing.
I just did it on the calculator, David. Wow, that is awesome. I never heard that before.
Well, see, it gets more and more amazing. So one day, I decide to take my signal generator program and I record scales, a special scaling technique to resonate pi and 5151 and the golden ratio. And these are probably the most powerful frequencies I've ever played with consciousness. But I have my daughter at this time is like 3 years old, 3.5 years old. It was last winter, not the winter we just had, the winter before. She's 4.5 now, so she would have been 3.5 then. And I pulsed the room with those three numbers, but scaled, which is kind of like resonating them into patterns. And I have a dream that I'm floating above the earth, and I'm encountering this fear of this bodily attachment to earth, that the further I leave earth, I'm losing my attachment to earth. And there's these bright lights in the distance, and they're strobing, and I start coming close to them, and they are sacred geometry pulses. Like I'm seeing every pattern in the most advanced sacred geometries coming from them. And the flashes of light are so bright and cosmically powerful. They tell me that they are the builders of all the geometries and all the shapes, from seashells to DNA to planets and stars and galaxies. And I cannot bear their presence. They're so advanced. Their energy fields are so advanced. I'm gasping for air. Like I'm not able to experience breath. I'm not able to experience human. I'm just pure light energy. And I'm like dying into their presence. And it's kind of like a supernova. Like their lights are really bright. They're not like car headlights. They're pulsing me with light energy like the sun. But there's all these patterns in the pulses. And I wake up, and my little daughter wakes up, and she had the same experience. She's telling me she was reading a storybook in her dream, and this super bright light came from behind her, and it was so bright it startled her and woke her up. I went, wow, those numbers. Now, I haven't done those numbers since. I transmitted them. There's a French virologist named Luc Montagnier who was the discoverer of the AIDS virus, but later in his career, he actually proves that DNA can read and transmit frequencies. So the DNA is in the middle of every one of the cells in your body. It's a little inductor-shaped coil. So any inductor can receive or transmit frequencies in electronics. But this is such a weak and fragile one. He was surprised, Luc Montagnier, to find that DNA could read a frequency as low as the Earth. So, he was doing like 7 hertz, which is, Tesla said it's 7.83 hertz, and, there's a whole science behind the frequencies on a sphere depending when you're standing on it. But nevertheless, he proved that DNA reads low frequencies and reads any frequency. So what that means is if I electrically transmit frequencies of a distant star or a distant planet, an exoplanet, or certain frequencies that have a particular location in spiritual, vibration, you can have an experience because we are beings of frequency and electricity.
Wow. This is wonderful stuff. I have no doubt that these ancient structures, they're all encoded with acoustics of some nature, especially the Great Pyramid. I mean, it's acoustically tuned. You can go into the Queen's Chamber, what they call the Queen's Chamber anyway. There's no queen or body ever found in there, but what they nicknamed the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber. But you can hear like conversations through hundreds of tons of rock, as if you're in the room. This is an acoustically tuned monument, whether people accept it or not. You can still go into
and that's the next level. So I'm talking about electromagnetic frequencies, and then there's the acoustic level, which is even more astounding. The fact that it's perfect acoustically, it's perfect electromagnetically. I mean, there's no way these things were built by, somebody.
We had to have a helping hand. I mean, I know from my own engineering and electrical engineering, this monument is not understood by anybody. I mean, in the mainstream Egyptology, for example, even engineers that flock to this thing because they find it the biggest puzzle on the planet, even they will admit it's only the engineers that get to admit that this thing is an anomaly in engineering. Yeah. We don't know how to build it. We couldn't do it today. If we did do it today, we couldn't do it in the time frame. It's such a bizarre mystery. I actually had studied a little bit before, David, on the composition of these rocks. I mean, like you say, the granite's got this crystal matrix in it, shipped 500 miles away from Aswan. That's in around the King's Chamber in the core body, like you say. And then these, I think is there a calcium or a magnesium compound on the outer casing stones or something like that? It's almost like a capacitor stroke sandwich of different materials.
Oh yeah, I mean that's how we make our components that are running our computers. So you have your crystal oscillators generate frequencies, and then your transistors amplify signals. And transistors are made in a similar way in that you do layers like positive, negative, positive, and negative, positive, negatives, NPNs and PNP transistors. And now we're making transistors so small, which is just layers of crystal and layers of conductor. And certain gems are actually already that. Like, the difference between a gem and pure quartz is that you have silica bonded with aluminum. Like, for example, a sapphire, it's an aluminum silicate. And with rubies, I think it's chromium. So there's different trace metals versus electrolyte or semiconductors. And then that creates an oscillator. So a semi-precious gem is already an oscillator. It's already naturally an oscillating material. And granite has the mica, it has, obsidian, it has all kinds of different things in it. But depending on where it comes from in the world, some of it is quite radioactive. It's ionizing. There is uranium inside of it. And that is probably why they put it in the core, because it's already supercharging. So if you have the right geometry, but then you need a charge source. And see, there was this documentary, they thought they proved that the Grand Gallery, because they found these rollers where they had these really smooth logs that allowed to roll up and down. And they thought that's what they're doing. They're rolling up and down the stones to bring them up to keep building it. And I said, wait a minute, if you had a charge source an electrical charge source, which the Ark of the Covenant might have been,
Mm-hmm.
and you roll it up and down your tuner, you're changing the frequency, right? So just like if you make a crystal radio set with a toilet paper roll and you wrap your copper wire and you put a diode in there, and then you have this little rod, and you slide it up and down the coil, you're changing frequency to get into different radio stations, to tune to different radio stations on this AM band, this primitive little radio that I used to make those when I was a kid.
Just like we do, yeah, like a variable capacitor in an AM radio. You just change the frequency by changing the plates.
Right. So if you have a sloped oscillator, if you go up to the top of the pyramid, you're reaching a band of 5151 megahertz squared. But if you go to the bottom, you're in kilohertz, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means if you have the grand gallery is basically your tuning device to change frequencies. You know that if you have any two oscillators anywhere on the planet at the same frequency, with a tiny tuner, you have communication. That's how phones work and everything. So any two oscillators at the same frequency open up a gate of communication. But my theory was, what if, because there's so many more electrons in a massive semiconductor the size of the pyramid compared to these ones in our cell phones, what if it opens up a vortex where you can physically teleport to people from one location to the next at the exact same frequency?
This thing functions like a machine. I have no doubt that the Great Pyramid functioned like a machine. This thing was like a technical device. I have no doubt about that.
But see, we had pyramids all over the planet. So if you tune any of them to the same frequency, you got, at the very least, you have communication. But there's no way they would make a pyramid that big just to communicate with a voice. You see, there's got to be a greater purpose to have that many more electrons in a massive frickin' tuner.
Didn't they use mica in the Mexican pyramids? There's a lot of mica which is used in capacitors as well. That's like into the matrix of the monuments in Mexico.
Yes, I think mica is a dielectric. So it's this is what solid state physics is about. One of my favorite books, which is an old book out of print, is reading the history of each crystal and semiconductive material and conductive material on the periodic table, and what are the electrical properties of it. And now they're finding there's a new discovery, and it's on mainstream news, that they found a pool of mercury at the bottom of the pyramids. And
just like China, there's a pool of mercury in is it Teotihuacan? I can't remember, one of the Mexican pyramids. I've seen the article.
Yeah, and that would mean the theories about mercury and boiling mercury, creating a vortex and anti-gravity effects. But when you trap mercury that's spinning mercury or boiling mercury in a pyramid geometry, what would happen? Well, now that we found evidence of mercury in the base of a pyramid, then you have to do experiments to find out what they're going to do. And that's what uncovering this evidence is telling us more and more, that these ancient structures and civilizations were not primitive monuments, merely monuments like monuments in Washington D.C. today. They had an electronic purpose. They had a power. They had an ability to, at the very least, open up portals of communication with other star systems and other beings in other dimensions. But I think it's greater than that. I believe that I had this experience. This is quite an amazing experience. Because NASA knew the radius of 5 Palladian suns using this parallax system, I was able to calculate the frequencies of 5 Palladian stars and then scale them into a more human range, because they're really low wavelengths that correspond to deep delta brainwaves. And I was able to send them out one night, and in that night, Anubis appears to me in a dream, and he's this royal looking black dog, and he was wearing jewelry around his neck and his wrists, and he's telling me that a cataclysmic event happened on the earth that was so sudden that they all had to rush into the pyramid, and Anubis sits on this throne. This is the god of the underworld, the son of Isis' sister, Nephthys. So he's symbolically a shapeshifter.
Mm-hmm.
And he may not have actually looked like a dog in reality, but it's hard to say if he was a shapeshifter or not. Anyway, in this dream, he sits on this throne in the pyramid, switches it on. A whirlwind vortex opens up just above the top of the pyramid, and it burns a hole into our fabric of our local space-time. It's so hot, it's so condensed, the light. And literally, everyone in the pyramid goes through this vortex, and they go to another location in the universe, and I go with Anubis. And he tells me that when the Earth settled after this disaster, they came back through the wormhole, and everyone worshipped them as gods, but they weren't gods. They were just very advanced. And they said that he told me they worshipped us like we were gods, but we weren't. He said we were just a very advanced civilization. And the pyramids still worked at that time before they were destroyed by vandals. And probably the ark was taken out of it by Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And I would suspect that Moses took it because in his time, the worship of the old deities and the old ancient Egyptian civilization was illegal. Mm-hmm. And the pharaohs wanted everyone to worship them as gods, and they simply weren't. And it probably, Moses felt the ark was under threat because the new establishment and the new pharaohs didn't understand it, and he had to get it out of there. And so he takes it, and the Egyptian armies were pursuing him because they want the ark. And I believe the ark slid up and down the Grand Gallery on a it was a charged power source, and the pyramid changed frequency depending on what height the charge was set at.
Mm-hmm.
Along the slope. So that's my theory, which is quite a new theory. But this is what Anubis showed me. Now, when I finished Evidence: The Case for NASA UFOs, I was editing it with my editing, guru, John Johnson. He was teaching me editing. He pretty much edited most of Evidence: The Case for NASA UFOs. And I was learning how to edit. In those days, I was seeing spirits all the time. Mm-hmm. And to my surprise, one night I woke up, and there was Anubis right in front of me, glowing with a lime green color, and so was Sekhmet. Sekhmet was with him, the cat.
Yep.
And I'm really seeing them. Like, I'm slapping my face, and I'm looking at them, and I realize that they're telling me that I'm on track, that these NASA UFOs are literally very powerfully, symbolically tied to them. The space shuttle was passing right over Northwest Africa, the home of the Dogon people who keep the pre-dynastic knowledge of ancient Egypt alive.
Oh yeah.
About the star series. And then the shuttle's passing right over the pyramids right when the tether incident was occurring. So there they are. And I was curious about the green color, and it's only recently in many Egyptian pictographs that I'm seeing the lime green color around Osiris in his skin and clothing, and I'm seeing it also in Anubis. But typically Anubis appears black, the jackal. And
wow.
So I realized that there's a meaning to the green. The green is very, very, very important. And I'm working on deeper understanding of that.
Wow.
So I've seen Anubis that one time with my eyes open, and I saw him strangely when I was doing Palladian frequencies, the time in Sedona.
Yeah. In a spiritual sense, Dave, and let's throw a little humanitarian question in there. I mean, people think we're advanced today because we got, big nuclear arsenal, and we've got like big giant telescopes, and we point and we goof off of the universe, and that's great. But I mean, do you think that the level of advancement of these UFOs or the ancient cultures we're talking what we talked about on the show, this level of advancement, do you think that only comes with a deep spiritual connection or a spiritual ascension? Do you think that the two of them have to go hand in hand?
Yes, I do. I think, when Paul Dirac and Heisenberg, when Heisenberg came to Einstein and said it looked like the observers of the quantum experiments were affecting the results of the experiments, mm-hmm. I think that's when, for everyone from Dirac to Heisenberg to Max Planck, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. they all became very spiritual, and so did Einstein eventually, that they realized that consciousness is really a huge part of it. I mean, after all, it's really funny to me, when scientists are measuring the moment of the Big Bang, and then the first second and the second second, they're acting like somebody's watching. It's like, if you don't have an observer, it's not happening. So if consciousness at that time was observing it, then consciousness is the biggest part of it. And that's why, you cannot ignore the question of consciousness. And I think the newer physicists today grossly ignore what Max Planck and Einstein and Dirac and all of them put forward. They all had deep metaphysical things to say about consciousness and the nature of reality. Mm. And today's physicists don't follow that at all. They've grossly ignored it. You have to have both, because the observer is everywhere. When you're taking a measurement, there's an observer. When you're doing math, there's an observer. When you're talking about the results of an experiment that you're observing with a camera or with scintillation counters, there's an observer. So to say that there's no such thing as the observer and it's not affecting anything is ridiculous.
It's a whole mind trip, the quantum physics. In a way, that philosophical reintroduction, I mean, because we had that Newtonian mechanics for God knows how many centuries, we seem to got sanitized, and it's like this Newtonian model kind of dominated and kind of said, oh, it's all mechanical, it's all it's all practical, it's all scientific, and it's like metaphysics got pushed out of the way until quantum physics was discovered, and then wow, it's gone back to philosophy now. It's come back full circle.
It's starting to come back. I mean, even now, there's some new news that NASA has tested a type of propulsion that could enable the speed of light and faster than the speed of light movement of craft. And the way it works, this is actually on a NASA website. It's on my Facebook wall right now. I'm just going to get the link here. This is really exciting because I know how this thing works. Mm-hmm. And it looks like the scientists who discovered it, one is a woman in China, which is really fantastic to see women making major discoveries in physics that even Einstein argued that his wife was cooperatively responsible for his discovery and proving the theory of relativity, and yet everyone thought, oh, you're just being nice to your wife. This is on NASAspaceflight.com. Mm-hmm. There's a futuristic electromagnetic drive, but the way this drive works makes no sense to Newtonian physics at all, because there's no propellant mass. Wow. See, when fuel is exploding out of a rocket, it has mass and weight, and when you throw weight out, the spaceship goes in the opposite direction.
I'm just looking at this new drive. I'm just looking at it now. It's awesome looking. This is sophisticated.
You see this?
Yeah. Wow.
Well, see, the way it works, and I said this when I was lecturing at Contact in the Desert 2 years ago, that the magnetron, which is the heart of a microwave oven, is an untapped resource, because a magnetron is essentially a resonant cavity structure that traps electrons and electromagnetism in a cavity. Mm-hmm. And that's what the pyramids are. There's so much insulation with the 3 layers around the pyramid that it basically traps an electromagnetic wave into a resonant cavity structure. And some very, very strange things happen when you do that. Mm-hmm. And that's what this new drive is. They're doing experiments with microwave oven resonant cavity magnetrons. Mm-hmm. And at the heart of a microwave generator is this little tungsten coil. And tungsten is an amazing, amazing metal with incredible properties, generating positive electrons, which is a really deep phenomenon. And it basically gives birth to an electromagnetic wave that gets trapped in this thick amount of insulating copper or material. And because it gets trapped in there, it becomes very dense, and because the wavelength is so small, you get a really high frequency, high amplitude wave, and you can cook a potato with it. But something else happens with magnetrons if you trap the wave in the material. Mm-hmm. And what it is, it's a phenomenon called quantum tunneling. And NASA has not admitted it yet in this article. They don't really know what's causing the propulsion. They have a lot of theories, but they do know that they've tested it in a vacuum chamber, and the effect is real, but there's no propellant mass. And what they think it is are ions being generated. And an ion is just an electron with an extra unbound electron, negative or positive, on it, to determine a positive or negative ion or charged particle.
Yeah.
Well, they're not, because a charged particle would be propellant mass. And that can't be it, because according to this article, there is no mass. But yet, it's demonstrating that there really is a powerful effect going on here. And what I think it is, this is my prediction, and this is not in the article, is, and I've studied this in solid state physics, that when you trap electromagnetic waves in a cavity, it forces open semiconductor holes. And the semiconductor hole will cause a quantum tunneling of the electron or even the electromagnetic wave to get out of the trap. And to get out, it opens up a micro hole, which you could argue is a mini vortex. Even you could even call, if you trap enough energy in the resonant cavity, it can open up a micro wormhole, I believe is what's actually happening. So you have the semiconductor holes exist in certain materials, and quartz is loaded with them. So, and granite would be very high in the semiconductor holes. So if you trap a wave inside the Great Pyramid, so let's say the Ark of the Covenant is a charged capacitor of some type, and it releases a charge inside the pyramid. It can't get out. There's too much insulating material there. And because you have 3 different layers of material, it makes it even harder for it to get out. And the only way for it to get out are these tiny holes in tiny channels in the pyramid. And the wave becomes so compressed, it opens up one of these huge vortex holes in the apex in the top, which means they're probably the capstone of the pyramid might have been made out of some super material that allows these semiconductor holes to open up and create a wormhole. Because that's what Anubis showed me. He showed me a burning hot, super blinding bright light above the apex of the pyramid. And all the energy was focusing there.
These microscopic effects then, like quantum tunneling, then it's just the sheer scale of the pyramid that's keeping this all together. It's like the sheer scale is compressing all these microscopic effects. It couldn't be done on a small scale, the pyramid. It has to be that big.
It couldn't be done on a small scale. So, but with super materials, maybe it can be. So that's the thing about this new article about this new drive. There's no propellant mass. The propellant has to be the semiconductor holes are opening up because you're trapping it in the resonant cavity, which is the magnetron, the heart of a microwave oven. The only thing about a microwave oven is you give it a way out.
Yeah.
Right? You give it a way out.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I know this might be true is there's this, in the FBI files, this is a very important study I did years ago.
Sure.
It's in my film From Here to Andromeda. In the FBI files, there is a case of a kid who worked at Chevron, and he test flies his flying saucer that successfully levitates and flies around North Hollywood. It catches on fire and crashes in a woman's yard. And they take it apart, and you can see pictures of this. I mean, I have the pictures. They're pretty bad, black and white, scratchy looking pictures. But what this kid did is he put a tungsten radio tube, which is really the core of a magnetron. It's a tungsten coil. And he trapped it in a thick aluminum disc-shaped shell with 2 halves that he bolted together. And essentially the electromagnetism would get so dense in there, and most of it couldn't get out because of the thick aluminum. Although there's another metal you can use that will trap it 1,000 times better than aluminum. But nevertheless, it flew. It was anti-gravitic. He flew it on July 8th, 1947, the same day as the Roswell incident.
Incredible.
How the heck did that happen? Well, what I'm telling you about his experiment that is so key is he basically built a magnetron, but he didn't give it any way to get out. It got trapped in there. It got super hot in there. And it flew metal craft. It was like 30-something inches wide, but he had no way to get the electrons out. So they got trapped in there. Electromagnetism's trapped in there, and it got the microwaves built up so intense, the thing got so hot, it just caught on fire and melted and probably spit out all the magnetic field and came crashing down. Well, I think the key to anti-gravity is, you see, this new NASA experiment.
Mm-hmm.
There's something that happens on the other side of the skin when you trap it, but you have to be able to cool it and maintain a proper temperature and be in control of it, as well as know frequencies. But my theory now is, with certain metal skins in certain layers, this kid was very primitive, layering of materials, because we know from samples from the Roswell incident, there are samples, and I even have one of those samples, from Chuck Wade's, that the skin of the Roswell craft, and this was from my friend Boyd Bushman at Lockheed, had multiple layers of, looks like silica, aluminum, but a different type of bond of silica. Like, silica is bonded with oxygen and you get quartz.
Silicon dioxide, silicon dioxide.
So, and silica is a tetrahedron, under the molecular bond structure is a three-sided pyramid. And pyramid structures naturally, when a wave gets trapped in a pyramid, what it does is it compresses at the top. So you have a wider wavelength at the bottom, and it's stuck in there, and then it resonates, and it gets really dense at the top. Now I have a whole presentation on how that generates faster than light signaling, but that's a whole different subject. But what I'm saying about anti-gravity and levitation is that this is part of the secret. Part of the secret is taking the magnetron, using the right material, and producing levitation effects, which is what this kid did. But now NASA's using a magnetron, and they're getting warp drive signals. They're getting signals that apparently could be faster than light.
It's incredible stuff, David. I know.
NASA spaceflight.com. So what did the ancient Egyptians know about resonant cavities? Why did they make them? Yeah. Well, we're just starting to find out now that things like this, that they were so far ahead of us. So far.
And just for the listeners, David, I mean, quantum tunneling is a very real effect. I know they have the tracks on the mobile phones. They can only get them so close together because the electrons get confused which track they're in. They literally can migrate from one track to another, and they have to keep a minimum separation distance to this quantum tunneling. It's a very real, practical effect, even in our own mobile phones in our engineering industry.
Well, and it causes, when they made transformers in the early days out of pure iron, iron has a lot of the semiconductor holes in it. It's one of the best conductors that's full of holes. And they said this is a problem because when the holes open up, it creates instabilities in the magnetic field because your north-south gets distorted by all these side holes, which are very strong little vortexes.
Sure.
So they decided to make cores of transformers out of ferrite, which is a man-made composite using iron and other materials to have a stable material that doesn't have the holes. And I'm like, you guys got to work on these holes. I mean, you don't realize how powerful they are because Paul Dirac knows more about semiconductor holes than anybody. The physicist Paul Dirac. And I don't think today's explanations of the holes are very, very knowledgeable. I think there's so much potential with these holes, and I think that's what's causing the propulsion in this new massive press release, NASAspaceflight.com, on the, it's called Evaluating NASA's Futuristic Electromagnetic Drive. Because that's what they're doing, they're trapping it. But when you trap an electromagnetic wave, the skin, the material you're trapping it in, can determine the hole's ability to open and close, and the power and in directing the hole, the energy. Because when it comes out, it goes faster than light. A quantum tunneling event opens up a faster than light signal. And that could explain why NASA is saying in this article that these particular drives could go faster than light. But they still, the reason they can't explain it in the article, and they have all these theories that are probably wrong, they only know the data's there. The data says that this looks like a super warp drive space propulsion system. They just don't know why it's happening. And I really think it's the holes. So that means they need to test different materials and different strata and different layers of materials around the magnetron cavity. And that's what the Egyptians had down. They had it down. They knew the power of trapping frequencies in these cavities.
Think about it though, David. I mean, if entities came to this planet with very limited building materials, I mean, they're going to use the natural source material on the planet, which is rock with, you know, metallic traces in it. You know, what an ingenious way to come to this planet to terraform it with pyramids, natural metallic rock with crystals and all sorts, using the sheer scale and the sheer geometry and the natural composition of our planet to do things. I mean, they're basically doing what we did with transistors, but on a really big scale, because it was, you know, they had plenty of rock. One thing the Earth has is plenty of these natural building components.
And plenty of crystal. You know, there's an amazing book called Crystal Fire by Lillian Hodison, I think is her name, and that's what started me all of this. And now, you know, I have these crystal pendants that are vibrationally treated that we sell at davidsradio.net, and I have my transmitters there too that people can play around with and really see the effects of consciousness. But I almost make the joke that we're going to have to go back to the Stone Age. So we went from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and the Bronze Age, and then we went to the semiconductive, you know, crystal oscillator age using quartz. But then we're going to start to see that it's not just quartz, because we mainly use quartz, and we use what's the other one that we're making transistors out of? It's you find it in garlic and reishi mushrooms. It's germanium.
Oh, germanium, yes.
Yeah, so we use germanium crystals and we use quartz. But I think there are so many types of stone that have amazing properties. I think the Egyptians were no fools to use the granite and the limestone.
Even in Ireland, David, you know, there's Newgrange riddled with quartz. In Carrowkeel, Carrowmore, they were even exposing the quartz veins as walls of the chambers. You know, they were obsessed with quartz in Ireland, Britain, and Gavrinis in Brittany as well. These megalithic places going back deep antiquity, they were obsessed with quartz. They knew the properties of it.
Yeah, and then now what was underneath where a lot of the cropsicles are? Where did they find the chalk?
Oh yeah, the chalk beds,
which is a calcium. No, calcium carbonate is an electrolyte. It's a high energy electrolyte. So whenever you see what is chalk made out of? Chalk is
it's calcium. It's like a calcium compound.
It's a calcium compound, I think.
Yeah,
so that's a high energy electrolyte. Lithium is super high energy electrolyte. So we use lithium in our batteries. You find lithium in lemon juice. So if you want to give your body super energy, you drink lots of lemon water, and it'll give you a natural source of lithium. I think supplementing lithium could be dangerous because it's flammable. The electrons are so easily agitated in lithium.
Sure. You know, David, I know we're out of time.
See, this is really exciting stuff because you're talking about stone structures in Ireland, and now we're finding pyramids all over the world. In England, we're finding them in Africa. We're finding pyramids everywhere, and we're talking about these quantum tunneling effects. And now NASA has created an experiment. I mean, I always said as soon as I understood how the microwave oven worked and the magnetron worked, I realized it was a resonant cavity structure, and I went, "Oh my God!" And then Michael Tellinger, him and I were both lecturing at Contact in the Desert at the same time, and we were using the same slide of a magnetron because he was talking about the resonant cavity structures in South Africa, and I was talking about the pyramids as a resonant cavity, and we both tuned into the same thing. We had no communication with each other, and we go, "Oh my God, we're figuring this out. We're realizing that these things were resonant cavity structures." So to determine the frequencies that a cavity would trap, you just need to know the dimensions and the speed of light and the speed of electrons.
Michael's a good friend. I just did a TV interview actually, David, with him in Stuttgart, and we were talking about the magnetrons, and Michael has done some seriously pioneering work on the structures.
Absolutely.
And when you actually look at a picture of a magnetron and you look at a picture of these stone structures, you couldn't tell them apart in schematics.
Well, even some of the crop circles, you can look at some of the magnetron diagrams and go, because you see the satellite chambers, right? So you see your magnetron center chamber, and then you see the satellite circular chambers, and you go, that looks like a crop circle with the satellite circle.
Incredible.
So it all starts to make sense. It's all coming together. It's all about geometry. It's about materials. And I believe the secret to anti-gravity lies in what we're talking about. And NASA is accidentally, inadvertently stumbling upon the magnetron. And who knows, maybe they've been listening. Maybe they've been coming to the conferences and listening. Challenger and I talk about resonant cavity structures.
I have no doubt. David, I know...
The quantum tunneling thing is, there's two things. There's quantum tunneling, and then there is the semiconductor holes. I just want to point those two things out. So, the material, well, if you trap an electromagnetic wave in a resonant cavity made of metal, for example, iron, you will force one of the holes to open up, the semiconductor holes, and that causes a quantum tunneling event, which generates a faster than light signal. But I think if you trap enough energy, you're going to open up a micro wormhole, and that's big stuff. You seem to be able to come in and out of the resonant frequencies that resonant cavity geometries help create.
Sure.
And that interests me because when we're looking at this NASA footage that NASA's camera is clearly seeing into the near and the far ultraviolet, as well as some very particular infrared frequencies, we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing these balls of light that behave intelligently. And there's one scene in when the space shuttle's over Africa where we see these very faint, whispery faint balls of light flying into formation in a circle and stopping and holding their circular form. And then one flies into the middle, and the second it gets to the middle, it gives off this extra luminosity. And you go, are these the same ones as the crop circle makers? See, for me, this stuff gets deeper and deeper and deeper. My mind just goes deeper and deeper. And I go, I found this online. I did not discover this particular point I'm about to tell you, but if you take pi 3.14, times 0.5151, you get phi, the golden ratio, 1.618.
Really?
Well,
wow.
So what that does is it shows you that the 5151 harmonic and pi and phi are all shapes from seashells to DNA to planets and stars and galaxies. And I cannot bear their presence. They're so advanced. Their energy fields are so advanced. I'm gasping for air. Like I'm not able to experience breath. I'm not able to experience human. I'm just pure light energy. And I'm like dying into their presence. And it's kind of like a supernova. Like their lights are really bright. They're not like car headlights. They're pulsing me with light energy like the sun. But there's all these patterns in the pulses. And I wake up. And my little daughter wakes up. And she had the same experience. She's telling me she was reading a storybook in her dream, and this super bright light came from behind her, and it was so bright it startled her and woke her up. I went, wow, those numbers. Now, I haven't done those numbers since. I transmitted them. There's a French virologist named Luc Montagnier who was the discoverer of the AIDS virus, but later in his career, he actually proves that DNA can read and transmit frequencies. So the DNA is in the middle of every one of the cells in your body. It's a little inductor-shaped coil. So any inductor can receive or transmit frequencies in electronics. But this is such a weak and fragile one. He was surprised, Luc Montagnier, to find the DNA could read all part of a trinity of sacred geometry numbers, and the 5151 has been missing.
I just did it on the calculator, David. Wow, that is awesome. I never heard that before.
Well, see, that gets more and more amazing. So one day, I decide to take my signal generator program and I record scales, a special scaling technique to resonate pi and 5151 and the golden ratio. And these are probably the most powerful frequencies I've ever played with consciousness. But I have my daughter at this time is like 3 years old. 3.5 years old. It was last winter, not the winter we just had, the winter before. She's 4.5 now, so she would have been 3.5 then. And I pulsed the room with those three numbers, but scaled, which is kind of like resonating them into patterns. And I have a dream that I'm floating above the earth, and I'm encountering this fear of this bodily attachment to earth, that the further I leave earth, I'm losing my attachment to earth, and there's these bright lights in the distance, and they're strobing, and I start coming close to them, and they are sacred geometry pulses. Like, I'm seeing every pattern in the most advanced sacred geometries coming from them. And the flashes of light are so bright and cosmically powerful. They tell me that they are the builders of all the geometries and all the sheet, a frequency as low as the earth. So, he was doing like 7 hertz, which is, Tesla said it's 7.83 hertz, and, there's a whole science behind the frequencies on a sphere depending when you're standing on it. But nevertheless, he proved that DNA reads low frequencies and reads any frequency. So what that means is if I electrically transmit frequencies of a distant star or a distant planet, an exoplanet, or certain frequencies that have a particular location in spiritual, vibration, you can have an experience because we are beings of frequency and electricity.
Wow. This is wonderful stuff. I have no doubt that these ancient structures, they're all encoded with acoustics of some nature, especially the Great Pyramid. I mean, it's acoustically tuned. You can go into the Queen's Chamber, what they call the Queen's Chamber anyway. There's no queen or body ever found in there, but what they nicknamed the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber. But you can hear like conversations through hundreds of tons of rock, as if you're in the room. This is an acoustically tuned monument, whether people accept it or not. You can still go into
and that's the next level. So I'm talking about electromagnetic frequencies, and then there's the acoustic level, which is even more astounding. The fact that it's perfect acoustically, it's perfect electromagnetically.
Do you think that there's like an Earth grid, and the UFOs or energies or entities are attracted to these grids on the Earth? There's like frequencies coming out at certain nodal points. Do you think that's the key to this?
Well, yeah, because wherever you have the proper resonant frequencies, it gives them a vortex point to come in and interact with us. And those sacred geometry structures that you're seeing in the crop circles in England. In fact, there's one of them that's identical, you'll see in my video, the vortex, to the vortex waveform coming out of the middle of the NASA UFO, which is a ball of light. So we see a connection, and we see a connection in many people's work that some of these orbs of light are the actual beings themselves, and the craft are something different. And that not all of them need the craft. A lot of them